So I recently learned something about Star Wars that I had never heard before, and I've been watching Star Wars since it came out in 1977. I had never heard this before at all in my life, and that goes to show you that no matter how old you are continually learning things. And to me, it was a shock. I had to go and look it up and read the article. Well, I don't know about you, but if you were back in 1977 and you saw Star Wars, then you know that the following year on TV, there came out a series, a sci fi series, and I was so in love with this series. I watched it all the time. It had a little bit of cheese in it, but it was pretty fantastic for what it was. And come to find out, there was a guy from Star Wars's Light and Production, the Lucasfilm company that made Light and Magic, and he went from Star Wars, A New Hope, to this show, and he brought a lot of his stuff with it. And the show was pretty fantastic for 1978 on TV. And if you don't know, that show was Battlestar Galactica. Now, it had Lorne Greene, who was a huge Western guy who a lot of people back then saw him play Western roles. And it had, in the first first episode, it had Rick Springfield, and he gets killed off. Spoiler alert. And it had a lot of different actors in it that, it went for, I guess, two or three. It went from 78 to 80, I think, or 70. Yeah, like 2 seasons, I think. But it was such a great series. But when it came out in 1978, George Lucas and Fox saw it and were like, oh, no, no, no. You're plagiarizing Star Wars. So they had this huge lawsuit. So they sued Paramount, I think it was. I could be wrong. Over Battlestar Galactica and them taking ideas from Star Wars and using it in Battlestar Galactica. So I found this article and I wanted to share it with you real quick. So let me pull this up and I will read a little bit of it and tell you why Battlestar Galactica was sued by Star Wars and how it ended. So it says, two of the most influential science fiction franchises in the 1970s went head-to-head in courts. When George Lucas's Star Wars sued Battlestar Galactica in 1978, and here's how the court case ended. The legal dispute between Star Wars and BSG started just as George Lucas's movie began spawning the billion-dollar franchise that continues to dominate the pop culture landscape to this day. Battlestar Galactica was less successful than Star Wars, and the legal dispute lasted for longer than the lifespan of the TV show and its 1980s spinoff, which I don't think I ever saw that. At the heart of the legal battle between Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica was a dispute over plagiarism and a feud between George Lucas and a former employee. Plagiarism was the main complaint, but it's interesting to note that both Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica stole from classic sci-fi. This fact didn't escape the lawyers defending Battlestar Galactica against Fox and George Lucas in a court case that would expose just how indebted Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica were to the classic science fiction serials of the 1930s, but also honored how they were both moving the genre forward. Battlestar Galactica shared production staff with Star Wars, and this is the person who was working with Industrial Light and Magic, that's the name, came to me, and Battlestar Galactica. The connection between Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars is John Dykstra, a VFX artist who worked on both iconic science fiction franchises. Dykstra had been recommended to George Lucas by the legendary VXF supervisor Doug Trumbull, who had previously worked on Stanley Kubrick's sci-fi masterpiece 2001, A Space Odyssey. Sadly, Dykstra and Lucas had a strained working relationship, which led to the former being released from the Star Wars movie after principal filming was completed. From there, Dykstra went on to supervise the special effects for the feature-length pilot for the original Battlestar Galactica series. Having been let go from George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, John Dykstra founded his own visual effects company, Apogee Inc. This company hired several staff members from ILM, including concept artist Ralph McQuarrie, who all worked on BSG's movie-length pilot scheduled for broadcast on ABC in fall of 1978, attracting the attention of 20th Century Fox and George Lucas. In June 1978, 20th Century Fox had submitted a lawsuit to the courts citing plagiarism and copyright infringement. Fox and their co-plaintiff, Lucasfilm Limited, believed that Battlestar Galactica had significantly plagiarized George Lucas's blockbuster movie in making their TV show. It's true that the success of Star Wars created an appetite for similar sci-fi epics, and Lucas was reportedly given a copy of the BSG's pilot script in 1977 as a courtesy. Glenn A. Larson insists that he first conceived of Battlestar Galactica in the late 1960s. Despite this, the Fox lawsuit cited 34 ideas that were apparently stolen from George Lucas's 1977 movie. Court documents relating to the 1982 appeal case submitted by 20th Century Fox summarized the original case, highlighting 13 of the 34 similarities that Fox found between Glenn A. Larson's Battlestar Galactica and George Lucas's Star Wars. Among these similarities was a heroine who was imprisoned by the totalitarian forces and a scene where musical entertainment is offered by bizarre, non-human creatures. Fox also stated that Star Wars and BSG both climax with an attack by the Democratic fighter pilots on the totalitarian headquarters, something which could also be said about any World War II movie involving the American or Royal Air Forces. What lent weight to Fox in George Lucas's lawsuit was a presentation of Battlestar Galactica's technology, which bore similarities to the look of the tech used in Star Wars. Fox stated that the vehicles in BSG were, like the Rebel ships in Star Wars, made to look used and old, contrary to the stereotypical sleek, new appearance of space-age equipment. As John Dykstra and his team had worked on the designs and effects for Star Wars, it's hardly surprising that their creative vision was transferred over to their work on Battlestar Galactica. Did George Lucas and John Dykstra's Star Wars feud influence the BSG lawsuit? In the making of Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back by J.W. Rensler, George Lucas maintains that he took Battlestar Galactica to court because it spoiled the TV market for a potential Star Wars show. However, it's also been suggested that Lucas was upset that John Dykstra used techniques he pioneered for Star Wars while working on BSG. In pioneering these new camera techniques, Dykstra had created a wedge between him and Lucas, who was displeased that these technical innovations were delaying the production of his movie. The BSG court case was rumbling on while production began on Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, and it's telling that Lucas didn't invite John Dykstra back for the sequel. As a young filmmaker who didn't quite appreciate just how huge and influential his creation would become, it's understandable that George Lucas may have felt slighted by Dykstra using similar techniques on BSG. Given the fine line between plagiarism and adhering to similar genre tropes, it's surely the similar techniques used by Dykstra and his Star Wars colleagues that really inspired Fox's lawsuit against Battlestar Galactica. And it says, how Battlestar Galactica beat Star Wars in court. Did they beat him in court? In court, Universal countered that George Lucas's Star Wars had borrowed several science fiction ideas from their own licensed work. Universal's lawyers submitted a videotape montage of prior science fiction works, which presumably included the studio's 1930s theatrical science fiction serials, Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, to which Star Wars owes a debt. Both of these serials were also battles for good and evil in space, highlighting that Star Wars wasn't particularly unique in its central struggle. What was more damning was that Universal also cited the similarities between Star Wars R2-D2 and the friendly robot drones from Douglas Trumbull's Silent Running. It was John Dykstra's work on Silent Running that inspired Douglas Trumbull to recommend the special effects camera operator to George Lucas for Star Wars. Oh, the fact that Dykstra is a common thread across Silent Running, Star Wars, and Battlestar Galactica really answers the question of plagiarism between the three properties. As Dykstra was a common thread between the three, it's no exaggeration to claim that his unique creative vision was the driving force. The stylistic similarities between Star Wars and BSG. The court deemed that the similarities between Battlestar Galactica's story and the story of the Rebel Alliance's struggle against the Empire in Star Wars weren't plagiarism. They rejected Fox and Lucas's case, stating that BSG and Star Wars were only similarly on the most general level of intellectual abstraction. It was a disappointing result for the studio, who took their case to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. The Court of Appeals sided with Fox, stating that their arguments do in fact raise genuine issue of material fact as to whether only the Star Wars idea or the expression of that idea was copied. In January of 1983, the Court of Appeals reversed the initial decision to throw out Fox's case and remanded it for trial. This must have been a bitter pill for Universal to swallow, as the decision was made nearly 3 years after the cancellation of Battlestar Galactica in 1980. The fact that the legal disputes had lasted for longer than the original BSG ever did may have been behind the decision to settle the case out of court, meaning that it's never been entirely clear who, if anyone, was in the wrong. Ultimately, the Star Wars versus Battlestar Galactica legal dispute served to place both properties with an extensive canon of hugely influential science fiction, and it's a canon which continues to resonate 40 years after the legal dispute was resolved. Whew, thanks for sticking with me. That was a long article, but I just wanted to get it out there and show you what happened and why it happened and what was the result. I didn't know that Ralph McQuarrie went with John Dykstra to Apogee Inc., which I've heard of Apogee Inc., and I just find it really interesting. I love Battlestar Galactica growing up, and I watched it every week when it was released on TV. The Cylons freaked me out. The main boss in each Cylon Battlestar or whatever, I forget what the Cylon's big ship was called. They freaked me out too. And then you had Baltar, the bad guy, and Adama and Apollo and Starbuck, and they had all these guys, and I don't really see a connection. Very much, I don't see a connection between them and Star Wars. I mean, I love Star Wars, and I would be the first to say, yeah, they plagiarized, but I don't really see it. I see, these ragtag band of people like trying to find Earth, whereas Star Wars was totally, the good guys against the bad guys. In Battlestar Galactica, the good guys are trying to get to Earth, and they're trying to fight off the Cylons, as they flee. And I don't know. What are your thoughts? What do you think? Do you think that Battlestar Galactica plagiarized Star Wars? Do you think George Lucas was right? Do you think it was wrong? I'm kind of on the side of saying it was wrong. I don't think it was plagiarized. I mean, the toys and the Vipers from Battlestar Galactica were totally different from everything that they had. I mean, I know George Lucas was big on the toy production, and one of the things he was saying was, they'll get confused. No, they won't. Anyway, that's my take on it. Like I said, I believe that there was not any plagiarism. But talking about Star Wars, if you are excited about the new Rey movie that is possibly coming out, they got a new writer. And if you don't know who the writer is, it's in my video here. It tells you who it is. Who is it? I don't know. You'll have to go see. And like this video and like this one right here, subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, especially if you like my content. And remember, the Force will be with you always.